Hey, Slater Crusaders, America's the greatest country in the world. Thank you for being here. It is very important what's happening right now. You know, my posture, my default posture into these moments is to usually think, you know, this isn't that big of a deal. People overreacting. Let's get some real perspective about what's happening. I believe what's happening now is a big deal. I want to steal this line from Michael Malice. He said, "We are about to find out what happens to people infected with TDS, Trump derangement syndrome, without a T to fixate their D on." Right? So here we are now with just derangement, but no Trump. So what are they fixated on? Well, you. Twitter banned the president forever, suspended his account, suspended every other account that is associated with him. He was trying to avoid the ban by tweeting from like the official POTUS account and whatnot. That's something, but that's not the biggest story. By the way, keep in mind, this is the CEO of Twitter back in 2015. He said, "Twitter stands for freedom of expression. We stand for speaking truth to power, and we stand for empowering dialogue." That was back in 2015. Remember, every organization that is not explicitly right-wing will eventually become left-wing. Twitter's no different. Now, much worse than that even, is that all of the social media companies and all the Silicon Valley companies have colluded at the same time to prevent Parler from even existing. Parler was it was pitched as a free speech alternative to Twitter. I don't know if it's explicitly conservative or if just conservatives in mass have been moving over to Parler over the last few months or so. But Apple and Google have both banned Parler from their stores. So that's all Android and Apple phones, which is what, 98% of all the phones. And maybe even worse than that, Amazon removed Parler from their online servers. So the claim of, hey, listen, you conservatives, if you don't like Twitter censoring you, go start your own social media company. It's impossible now because Amazon, Google, and Apple and others have colluded to prevent you from doing that. First, they banned accounts. Now they're banning apps. And next, they'll ban complete websites. All right, who knows, even entire online television networks. It's worse than that. There's this guy, Ali. All right, I don't care for this person, but he organized a lot of these Stop the Steal events. He was not only banned from Twitter and all the rest, but PayPal, Venmo, Cash App, all banned him as well. They have banned him and they will ban you from being allowed to even participate in the digital economy. And I say they'll ban you. Do you think they're going to stop with just these people? Just like people thought they would only ban Alex Jones, right? And they're going to do it under this title. They're going to do it in the name of this intentionally vague concept of incitement to violence. Incitement to violence. But that means nothing anymore. All summer with Black Lives Matter, we heard from the left that people need to start taking to the streets. Nancy Pelosi said, I don't know why there aren't more uprisings across the country. These are uprisings against enemies of the state. Those are her words. Ayanna Pressley, one of what do they call them, the gang or the crew or whatever, AOC's thing, saying that there needs to be unrest in the streets for as long as there's unrest in our lives. And we could go on. The left, the squad, the left cheered and incited violence, actual violence, all summer long. And now anything the right does from this point forward, anything you do will be categorized as an incitement to violence. If you make a benign statement that's been made by everyone forever, something like, come on, everyone, we gotta fight for our rights. That's inciting violence. And everything's violence to the left. What's one of the rallying cries of the critical race theory people, right? What's something we've heard about for years on college campuses? Microaggressions. That's violence against me. You're committing violence with the words you use or the looks you give or whatever you do or don't do that they don't like. It's not just wrong or whatever. It's violence. Everything, I can't express enough. Everything you do is violence to the left. And everything you do that they don't agree with is violence or inciting violence. And therefore, you will be silenced, to say the least. Now, we'll save this for another day, but if you think lack of freedom of speech is bad, wait until they force on you compelled speech. That's the next level, and that's coming. Because the same people who say, you're inciting violence by the things you say, also say that silence is violence. So you can't say these things, and you must say these things. If you say these things that we don't like, then you're inciting violence. But if you don't say these things that we do like, your silence is violence. See how that works? Give an example. This Lila Rose, she's a pro-life. She runs this pro-life group. She wrote on Twitter the other day, she said, abortion is violence. Okay? I mean, you're literally killing a baby or a fetus, right? I mean, like, and some doctor wrote back, she said, this is violent rhetoric. It's objectively false, meant to incite others to commit crimes against clinics, patients, and healthcare providers. This is what domestic terrorism looks like. Do you get it? Lila Rose, according to the left, by being pro-life, is inciting violence. She's a domestic terrorist. What do we do to terrorists? Compelled speech is coming to a church near you, by the way, so get ready for that. We'll talk about that more another day. This is extremely important to understand what's happening right now. I'm stealing this analysis from Chad Felix Green with the very strong hints from Jesse Kelly. The left, who will control our government in 9 days, and who run every single Silicon Valley company, they believe, or have deranged themselves into believing, that they have survived Nazi Germany. Trump was Hitler, America is Nazi Germany, and they were the resistance. To them, they are heroes. They stopped Hitler. So they think that very highly of themselves. They also think that all Republicans are somewhere between 1860 racists and 1960s racists. And then you have a millennial generation raised on in their social studies classes of thinking that the civil rights heroes of the 60s were the greatest heroes who ever lived on this planet. And therefore, we now must live up to that standard. And millennials today must live out their savior fantasies. The left today believe that they've toppled the Confederacy, Jim Crow, and the Nazi military. That's how powerful they feel right now. Because they're not just silencing political opponents, they're eradicating violence and terrorism and racism and hate from the internet and from the world. They think you're this guy from 1860. That's who they think you are. The slave whipper, the slave beater. That's who they think you are. And they think you're this woman from not 1860, but 1960. The left thinks you are the white people who shouted at black children as they were going to school in the 50s and 60s. That's who they think you are. And they will do everything to make sure that that doesn't happen again. Now, of course, you're not these terrible things. That doesn't matter. They imagine you are. And they hate what they imagine you are. And that's the end of it. And there's nothing you can do to prove them wrong. Nothing. For Trump, because they're saviors. Right? For Trump, there was no Middle East peace deal possible that could have changed their mind about who he was. They think they are heroes of the age-old story of fighting for the good of humanity. And you're the enemy. If they want to be the heroes, they got to find an enemy, and that's you. All they have to do to justify actual violence against you in the streets is to falsely call you a fascist. If you're a fascist, they call themselves an anti-fascist, and therefore anything they do is justified. We've seen that all summer long. If they call themselves an anti-fascist, you're a fascist, and they can punch you in the face, and that's great. They're killing Hitler. It's been all year. Get ready for this in every aspect of life. Get ready for this in every aspect of life. You can call it dramatic, but did you ever think that what we saw with Parler this weekend would ever happen? Apple Google, Amazon, 3 biggest companies in the world, all colluding to ban an app from even existing. So you can say it's dramatic, but how long until your business is not allowed to do any banking because you're not actively anti-racist enough? Because you don't post the Black Lives Matter 10 commandments on your storefront or on your website. That's the compelled speech that's coming. If you don't do that, you're racist. You're in the Klan, you're a Nazi. And we don't do business with Nazis, they'll say, while they think they're saving the world and their conscience feels good about it. I'll throw you one more thing that we'll get to tomorrow. Hegel was a German philosopher around 1800. He believed, and many people on the left believe today too, that true freedom is only possible through the state. He and the left today believes that freedom, the freedom. Sorry, my brain. So I was about to say this sentence and my brain was like, no, that's not right. But this is what they believe, right? Hegel and the left today believe that freedom is oppression. They think capitalism is oppression. And it's all racist too, right? That's the today's version. So it's not only oppressive, but it's racist. Freedom, capitalism is oppressive and racist. So the way to stop it, and the way to have true freedom, as they put it, is through state control of everything. This isn't me making this up. This was Hegel's, one of his main premises. If freedom is oppressive, if freedom leaves people open to being oppressed, then only state control can bring in real freedom. And the way to control everything is to purge wrongthink. And you can ask Jack Dorsey what that looks like. So that's where we are. Big tech colluding to silence you, marginalize you, persecute you, all done with the approval of their own conscience. By the way, you're not just racist or insurrectionists. You're terrorists. This is Wall Street Journal. It's Joe Biden, talking about Joe Biden. Mr. Biden said he plans to make a priority of passing a law against domestic terrorism. That's you. Federal law defines domestic terrorism as dangerous and illegal acts intended to coerce a population or influence the government. Dangerous acts, dangerous speech. So what's dangerous? That's the question. To the left, everything you do is dangerous that threatens their power. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders. I was so excited for the last segment here. I didn't promote what's coming up next. David Harsanyi is going to be here, and then Professor Vincent Racaniello will get the latest with COVID and a vaccine and all this stuff. We're going to do a lot more of what we did that first segment all week, because we're going to see more and more examples of what I just outlined. Hopefully I was clear and it makes sense. But we'll do more of that tomorrow. Right now I want to talk about infantilizing and catastrophizing, something we talked a bit about last week. So infantilizing is we all act like babies all the time, just whining babies nonstop. I just see it everywhere. And we raise our kids to be a bunch of pathetic, pitiful babies as well. This is the example I gave in passing, but I found the tweet. So it wasn't a congressman. I didn't think it was a congressman. He's like a legislative director for Elizabeth Warren or something. So he works in the Senate. This is what he said, and this is the picture of one of these rioters or protesters inside the Capitol building. This is the image I can't forget. I've walked this hall hundreds, maybe thousands of times with pride and a sense of duty about being a black staffer in this space. But this message is loud and clear. Spent yesterday texting friends and family that I'm okay. Seeing this picture, I realized, no, I'm not. You're not okay. The sight of the Confederate flag makes you not okay. I think of the 54th Massachusetts Infantry, 54th Massachusetts Regiment. It's a regiment of only black soldiers during the Civil War. One of the men of the 54th wrote to his fiancée and said, "This regiment has established its reputation. Not a man flinched." I got a story about the 54th. William Carney. William Carney was born into slavery in Virginia in 1840. He escaped on the Underground Railroad, made it to Massachusetts, and he joined the military during the Civil War. He wanted to lead a church, but he decided that this was the best way to serve God, to help free the oppressed. Within 1 month of joining, he was in his first combat. They were in a charge, leading a charge against a Confederate fort in Charleston. The unit's color guard was standing right next to Mr. Carney, and he was shot and killed. And as the flag was falling to the ground, he grabbed it. And he kept holding that American flag. And he saw this as his chance, his duty to keep that regiment together against heavy gunfire. Because if the flag went down, maybe people would see that as chaos and run away, retreat, as opposed to continuing their charge. He kept getting shot by Confederate bullets. And he finally couldn't go any further. And someone offered to take the flag from him. And he said, "Boys, I did my duty. The dear old flag never touched the ground." He survived. 600 troops in the 54th, half of them were killed, wounded, or captured that day. He earned the Medal of Honor for what he did that day. He was shot 4 times. He was literally shot 4 times in battle, carrying the American flag in a charge against a Confederate fort. And this Elizabeth Warren's aide sees a picture of a Confederate flag and keels over, I'm not okay. That's pathetic. And today we're told to kneel to the American flag. The same flag that William Carney was carrying, almost gave his life to make sure it never even touched the ground. We've infantilized ourselves. Everything's too much to handle. And we also catastrophize everything. Everything's Hitler. Everything's worse than Watergate. Not Bob Woodward, the other one, Carl Bernstein. Carl Bernstein, one of the Watergate reporters. Every week, he says that this thing's worse than Watergate. Whatever happened is worse than Watergate. You can't live like that in real life. You can't catastrophize everything. You can't function. If you knew someone in your life who catastrophized everything all the time, they literally can't function. You stub your toe on the leg of your bed and just fall to the ground in agony. You're screaming and crying and sobbing. Someone comes to help you and you're giving your last words. This is it for me. Oh, what happened? What happened? My toe. I slightly grazed it on the bed. But this is how it ends. Now I know what it felt like at D-Day. This is worse than Fallujah. You couldn't live like that. But this is what they do in media land every day, literally every day. People saying that what happened on Wednesday was the worst day in American history. That is catastrophizing. We're going to talk tomorrow about Arnold Schwarzenegger. Arnold Schwarzenegger made this video about Kristallnacht in Germany in 1938, the night of broken glass. And he said, I remember it well, or whatever, or I grew up in Europe and I knew it. And he compared what happened on Wednesday in the Capitol building to the night of broken glass. Are you out of your mind? In the night of broken glass, first of all, it was the German military who did it, right? Second of all, 30,000 Jews were sent to concentration camps that night. 300 synagogues were burned to the ground. 7,000 businesses were destroyed. I think it was 91 or 97 people were murdered that night. Over 600 committed suicide shortly after. It was so traumatic and so horrific. And you're going to compare what happened on Wednesday to that? You've lost all sense of proportion and you've catastrophized. That's what we do every day. It's crazy. And we lose all sense of proportion when we do that. And then the response, that's the worst part. The response that follows is why they do this. This is Michael Tracy. He said, the more extreme the characterization of the event, the more extreme the remedial action they're going to say is necessary, right? So they couldn't just say it was, oh, geez, listen, there's a mob going on and some people really got out of control and they're gonna go to jail, but we gotta move on from this. That wasn't it. No, it was a coup. But then that wasn't strong enough. It was an insurrection. And then that wasn't strong enough. It was a terrorist attack. The only thing left for them to say is it was genocide. They may not use those words, but they're sure acting like it was genocide that was committed last Wednesday. Worst day in American history. The other day, I forget why it even came up, but we talked about the year of the 5 emperors in ancient Rome. We talked about the year of the 5 emperors, 193. And we talked about how horrific and ridiculous that year was in 193. Now, the year of the 5 emperors, not to be confused with the year of the 4 emperors, which was 69. Also not to be confused with the year of the 6 emperors in 238. So there were certainly people who were alive during 193 and 238. So they were alive during the year of the 5 emperors and the year of the 6 emperors. Well, how do you think each of these emperors stopped being emperor? Do you think they were like, you know what? I think this guy will do a better job. I'm just gonna go ahead and hand them the reins of powers and keep peace in all the land. They killed each other all the time, nonstop. One day we can do a segment on all these guys and go through how all this happened and just get a deeper sense of how melodramatic people are being today, but they're doing it for a reason. The more extreme they characterize the event, the more extreme the remedy is to stop it from ever happening again. A real coup, like 73 in Chile, with tanks and stuff, it's like a lot different than the hour on Wednesday. And that matters. Someone on Facebook criticized me the other day for arguing over semantics when I made this point. No, words matter. Don't let anyone ridicule you into thinking that words don't matter. I'll give you an example just to be dramatic. Last Wednesday, was there Great Patriots were having a picnic in the Capitol Rotunda. Is that what happened? Was there a picnic going on in the Capitol Rotunda? Or did terrorists storm and siege the Capitol? Words matter. Don't let them get away with catastrophizing this, as they clearly are. So the point of this segment, don't be infantilized, don't be a baby, and don't be catastrophized. Don't be a baby about everything, and don't think that everything is the worst thing that's ever happened in history. We've been trained, and I use that word purposely, we've been trained by the media and by advertisers to get outraged over everything. We just operate now at a frequency of massive outrage. We're addicted to it. We're addicted to the chemical. It's literally an addiction. So while the left Biden could have taken this moment to unite the country. Instead, they actively used it to divide us even further by bringing race into it, by talking about articles of impeachment, perhaps today, by talking about the 25th Amendment to remove the president. For the love of Pete, there's 9 days left. Relax. But why are they talking about that? Because everything all the time has to be ramped up to maximum outrage nonstop. Tomorrow we'll talk more about why they do that. But again, simply, the more extreme the characterization of the event, the more extreme the remedial action they're going to say is necessary to stop it and stop you. David Harsanyi, coming up next. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders. So I need some calmness and some sensible thoughts here. And the man I turn to for those is David Harsanyi from the National Review. Mr. Harsanyi, how are you, sir?
I'm well. Thanks for having me.
Good. Thanks for being here. So let's talk briefly quick on Wednesday. So what are your thoughts on what happened at the Capitol on Wednesday? How do you describe what happened?
I think those guys were, I think it's seditious to try to stop Congress from doing its work. think those guys who ran in there were a bunch of yahoos, but it was dangerous. And the expectation you should have when you're threatening people who are doing their work in government is that you can get hurt. And I think it was an embarrassment for the United States. I don't, so that's what I think about that event on its own.
Was it insurrection and a coup and a terrorist attack?
It is not a coup, and I guess you can use insurrection technically, but I think that the way that people look at that word or process that word makes them think that, someone was going to take over the government. I'm sorry to say, or not sorry to say, but I know that the guy in the Viking helmet was not going to be the next Secretary of Defense. I don't think it was the government. I think it was a failure of the police and our leaders, and we need to find out who. We didn't have enough, police protection, and that allowed this to happen. And obviously, the people who did it deserve, the blame. But I think that we need to have better. Obviously, I think there was a failure of the police as well. So, but I don't think it was a coup. I think people are overreacting in that sense. And I also think that the idea that anyone who says anything about the election or anyone who was marching that day and didn't involve themselves in the actual vandalism and violence, etc., is also somehow guilty of some kind of insurrection is just wishful thinking and a way to try to censor people and a way to try to shut down speech.
How much blame do you put on the president for inciting violence? Because that's the new term. So we just talked in the last segment about this term inciting violence is going to be used all the time to shut people down, which we'll talk about in a little bit with Twitter and all the rest. I want to know what you think of this theory. Like when people talk about, the Slater president incited violence, my first thought is I put more personal responsibility on the people doing the violence than the inciter. And I think that's true for Jesse Jackson inciting Black Lives Matter, whoever. I tend to put more personal responsibility on the people doing it. What do you think?
Yeah, of course. I think that, yes, again, the word incite, I think the president incited people, as did others, because they keep repeating what I think are conspiracy theories about the election, that it was stolen from the people. But I don't know that legally it would be considered incitement. I read through his remarks, and he never said, go and, commit violence or anything like that. Using the incitement standard that now I see all these folks are using, and obviously the House, who I think is going to try to impeach Trump again, is using. We could say that the folks who spent 4 years claiming that the election was stolen by the Russians, or that, this is a inherently systemically racist country, would have incited the BLM or Antifa protests that also cost lives, that also cost lives of law enforcement. I don't want to play this game where we're talking about those events now, because I think we need to condemn this event. But if they're going to open it up to that discussion, then we need to talk about all things. And all things are that all summer we had mass violence across the United States incited by left-wing politicians to some extent, in the same way that I could say that Donald Trump incited this. Now, obviously, he's the president, so I think there's a higher bar for him to meet, and he has acted unpresidentially. And I look forward to him leaving. But, that doesn't change the worth and the impact of the words of other people as well.
Let's talk about what Twitter did to the president. I'm less concerned about Twitter banning the president, although that's something noteworthy, than I am about Amazon, Apple, and Google colluding. That's a strong word, but they all did it at the same time with Parler and sort of the conservative alternative to it. Do you find that more concerning?
Yeah, I find it very concerning. I'll tell you up front, I don't have answers to how to deal with it or what to do. But the idea that a bunch of giant corporations can get together and decide who gets to speak and who doesn't, and arbitrarily make up rules or enforce their own rules as they go along to shut down people they don't like is very concerning. And when people tell me, hey, look at all these bad things these people are saying who are being banned, what do you do protect them? I say to them that you have zero understanding of neutral principles, that for me, the value and defense of free speech has nothing to do with what the people are saying. It's about letting people speak. And, no no one's going to need you to go defend their First Amendment rights when they're putting up pictures of their kittens. It's always going to be something off-putting and weird that you need to defend. Those are the people who are usually shut down. Free speech is easy to defend when people are saying things that everyone agrees with. So I don't know what to do about it with 230 and all of that stuff, but I am very concerned. Yeah.
Let me push back. I'm totally with you for everyone's sake listening, but let me push back a little bit because I want to strengthen my understanding and my argument for this. Do you believe that, let's just take Twitter, but we can do this with Apple, Amazon, all of them. Do you believe Twitter has a principled or even legal obligation to allow freedom of speech on their privately owned platform?
I think every American should have feel like they have a principled duty to allow free speech to exist. And that means speech that they don't like. If they have a platform that is not, it's not a newspaper, it's not a political site, it's supposed to be a platform. So I don't know, again, I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know, how it works with them. And I don't think they need to, but to be fair to all users in equal amounts and all of that stuff. But I think Twitter should feel a principled obligation to have an open forum. This is where billions, I think, of people meet and speak. Certainly in the American political world, this is where people meet and speak. And I think it's a big problem that they don't feel that principled need. But when we look at the world right now, you see journalists are almost, I think, the most antagonistic towards free speech they don't like, which is, to me, amazing, being, that I've, for more than 20 years, worked in journalism to some extent or another. So that is really bothersome because and I'm writing about this now, but when you have a right like free expression, that's a natural right that we supposedly believe in. There's also a value. We value free expression. That right exists because we have an underlying idealistic value that we typically embrace. Once we lose that and we're like, yeah, it's fine if we shut everyone down that we don't like, technically we can do it. Yeah, well, technically you can do a lot of things that I think aren't very good. So I think that's a big problem. And watching that, how many journalists have stood up to say, maybe we shouldn't be shutting down everyone's, who we disagree with speech. Like, look, quickly, people tell everyone, go build your own Twitter. And I've said that you need to build your own institutions if you want, and then Amazon just goes down and shuts down Parler. I mean, what are people supposed to do? Yeah. This is going to cause a lot of anger and angst about, the power of big tech.
So that was my next argument was, we've all said, build your own Twitter or whatever. Build your own conservative. If you don't like it, then leave it or whatever. So could you just keep doing that argument though, right? Like, okay, so Amazon, Apple, Google, they all say you can't use our platform and you can't use our service. Okay, conservatives need to build their own servers. Conservatives need to build their own. I mean, I know it sounds ridiculous, but I'm just trying to understand this like libertarian-y argument. Like, is it Parler's fault for relying on Silicon Valley, oligarch, progressives to build their empire on? Right. So,
well, I mean, I think that for many years, these places acted in a neutral manner, like, kind of like, let's say, a credit card company. They could, there's three major credit cards, really two kinds of major credit cards, and they could just say, we're not going to allow people to buy your stuff anymore, which credit card companies sometimes do with gun stuff. So, it gets to be a point where you basically have a monopoly. Now, I don't believe Twitter is a monopoly because there are other avenues that people can speak on, like Facebook. But once you have all of them in a concerted manner undermining the ability of conservatives to speak, and even if they're yahoos who believe, in QAnon or whatever, that becomes, I think, problematic. I don't think many liberals see it that way. I think they're fine with shutting down that kind of speech. But using their very standards of incitement, et cetera, we should be able to shut down all Antifa sites and all BLM sites as well. And instead of shutting down BLM sites, these companies all send them money. And, so I think people see that kind of skewed enforcement and skewed, criticism. and they feel like it's unfair. And you can tell people all day long, oh, this is the legal prescription for this. But when people feel that stuff's unfair, they act accordingly. And let me tell you something: if they were shutting down BLM sites, you'd hear a very different kind of rhetoric from the left than you're hearing today.
That's for sure. Okay. Walk me off the ledge here a bit. Just trying to figure out what's next, what's coming, and prepare for it. And I don't want to be all melodramatic as I criticize the left for being melodramatic about last Wednesday. So first they banned people like Alex Jones from Twitter or wherever. Then they ban apps. Then they ban websites. Could you see that going? And then maybe the next step is they ban banking or certain companies from being, Bank of America, whoever says, oh, you're not actively anti-racist enough, you're not allowed to bank with us anymore. Is that stuff coming, or am I being too dramatic?
No, I mean, I think you saw, was it like a few months ago, the Google had banned the Federalists because they weren't banned their comment sections, maybe it was, because they weren't moderating them correctly.
Yeah.
I mean,
Google ads, yeah.
Yeah, Google ads are important in our economy, actually. And, it would be very easy for them just to ban people they don't like or companies they don't like, and to shut down sites that they don't like. Now, the way it goes is now, if you are not a Democrat, you are with the rioters who tried to burn down the Capitol. This is like how they liberals frame things. I saw Ezra Klein, how can Mitch McConnell not pass, Biden's legislation moving forward now that, they tried to burn down the Capitol. Well, I have nothing to do with trying to burn down a Capitol. I don't, I don't even feel that much of a need to condemn it. Obviously, I condemn it because it was a terrible event, but they try to make you condemn it to give you ownership of it. And then when you have ownership of it, then they talk about it like you're somehow responsible for it. I have zero to do with QAnon. I have zero to do with people spreading conspiracy theories about elections. And I don't feel any responsibility to, take ownership any more than they do of people who shot policemen in Oakland or wherever it was during one of the BLM rallies. Nor should I. And I don't even know what you asked, but now I'm on this tangent.
No, that's a great point. It was a good tangent, and we got to go. David Harsanyi, always good to talk to you, sir. I needed it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great day. National Review to go read all of his stuff and all of his books. Professor Vincent Racaniello coming up next. We'll talk about the vaccine, the latest variant, the different dosages, the second dose. Is the second dose have more side effects? We'll talk about all that stuff coming up next. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders. So some other things have captivated our attention this last week or so, but there's still a virus. And Professor Vincent Racaniello is here, always to help us make sense of what's happening right now. Professor of virology at Columbia University, of course. And then you got to go to microbe.tv and watch and listen to his podcast, This Week in Virology. Professor, hello, sir.
Good morning. How are you today?
And to you. Wonderful. So let's talk vaccine latest. What do we, okay, well, let's talk about the 1 dose versus 2 dose. What's the latest with this aspect of it? Is it, can we just do 1 dose? What are the difficulties of the 2 dose, et cetera?
All right, so the 2 vaccines that have received EUAs, emergency use authorizations in the US, the Pfizer and the Moderna mRNA vaccines, the AUA is based on 2 doses. And if you look at the documents for Moderna's research, which was presented to the FDA, they have a table where about 2,000 people were just followed after 1 dose. And in those people, we saw about 70% efficacy at preventing COVID, okay? And because of that, a lot of people have said, hey, let's give out just 1 dose. But there are a couple of problems with it. First of all, they didn't follow those people very far. And those people only, in the control group, they only saw mild COVID. So it's not clear that 1 dose will prevent severe COVID, which is really what we want. And so we don't have enough data to go to 1 dose. And the FDA has said that. The FDA has said, hey, it's a good idea, but we don't have the data and we can't approve it. But if you want to do a trial of 1 dose, go ahead and do that. So as far as I can see, the Moderna and Pfizer should still go 2 doses. But the thing is that the current recommendation is the second dose, 3-4 weeks after the first. You could actually go longer. There's no limitation as to how far you can go. Just the longer you go, of course, the more chance you might have to get infected. But if you need 2 months or 3 months to get around for that second dose, I think that's fine. Now, in the UK,
go ahead.
In the UK, delayed. They're using the AstraZeneca vaccine as well as Pfizer. They've delayed the second dose to 12 weeks so they can get more people in the first round, and that's perfectly fine. It's perfectly fine. There's no cut in stone reason to use a 4-week after the first dose regimen, okay?
Oh, super important. I don't know if I read or misread or just assumed that if you didn't get it after like the 2 weeks after the first one, then the second efficacy goes down a lot. But you're saying that's not the case.
No. For example, I get a tetanus booster every 10 years. It's no problem to wait 10 years to get that. So no, you could wait. The only downside of waiting, of course, is that you may get exposed to virus and you may get sick. But if you're careful, that should be minimized. So that's fine. And the UK is doing the 12-week second dose. So that makes perfect sense. So we could do that now.
Good. I heard, then I look for you to dispel this, that the second dose has maybe seen more complications and maybe makes people a little sicker than the first dose. Could that be true? It's the same thing, right? The first and second dose are the same thing. So why could there be a difference?
Yes, there is a difference. Your side effects could be more severe. Many people find the injection site soreness is worse. There's more fever, malaise, and so forth, tiredness. And it makes sense because the second dose now you're having a memory response. Your body has already seen that mRNA. It's already seen that foreign protein. And it's going, aha, I know this. And it's responding right away and way stronger. So that's actually good that you have more of a response because it means that you have some memory of the first one. Perfectly appropriate to do that.
Could it have too strong of a response the second time? Like, should you get less of a dose the second time, or is that not right?
Actually, in some of the early trials, the doses were higher, and I don't recall which company, they cut back because the side effects were a little too severe, too high fever and soreness and so forth. So this dose is optimized not to give too much of a problem after the second dose.
Very good. I saw on your website you wrote, you talked about evidence that lower CT values, I'm just very aware of CT values now since we talked about them a couple weeks ago. Evidence that lower CT values, cycle threshold values, on hospital admission is associated with higher mortality. But wait a second, I thought lower CT values were like a good thing. What's this mean?
So lower CT is more RNA, right? It's kind of the opposite of what you would think. Lower CT, fewer cycles you need to get a signal. That means there's more RNA there. So if you have a CT of 11, man, you have a ton of RNA. If you have a CT of 37, then you're probably not even infectious.
I had it backwards, that's right.
Yeah, it's very easy to get backwards. We all do that. So what was found in a number of studies, patients on admission, if you have a CT, and one study was below 22, those people were more likely to die than patients who had higher CT values, which would mean less RNA. And so you can use the CT to try and manage your patients, right? You say, oh, this patient's going to have an issue, so let's pay attention to them. Let's make sure we do other things that we don't normally do.
Very good. So clinically, if we're deciding who maybe to treat with certain things or to even give priority to, as we're perhaps in crisis mode at different hospitals, you're saying CT should be one of the variables.
Absolutely. Now, remember, we talked earlier about how high CT values means you're probably not transmissible, right? And so we should use that in another way, which is to say, if you have a CT of 37, you shouldn't be quarantined because you're not transmitting yet. Right now it's just reported as positive and go home for 2 weeks, and we don't really need to do that. So we're slowly coming around to realize that we need these CT values for taking care of patients on admission, but also to decide who should really be quarantined or not.
Yeah, and I'd argue not only that, but it's not only you have to be quarantined, but even like your close contacts now have to be quarantined. And so it's like even further than that, destructive-wise. Okay, what else do we have, Professor? What else do we need to know?
So I think the main issue right now is getting the vaccine to everyone. And this is not easy, right? It's been a problem in some states because they need help in distribution, and we have a lot of doses sitting in freezers. So I think as soon as we can get more of that out, we have already an excess than we put in people's arms. We'll start to see an impact on this transmission. So I think that's the key here. Now, still circulating in the news, of course, is scary stuff about the variant. And I think people should not worry so much about that. I mean, it is in the U.S. We had a public health official from Colorado on TWIV on Friday, and she has a couple of cases of the variant. But really the key is whether it explodes in the U.S. like it did in the U.K. And in the next couple of weeks, we're going to see. So until that happens, I wouldn't really worry about it. And all you need to do is everything you've been doing, masking, distancing, et cetera. So not a big deal.
Wouldn't, if it is more virulent, wouldn't it explode? Like, wouldn't it take over the less virulent strain or variant, excuse me?
So let's use the word transmissible, because transmissible and virulence are two different properties, right? Transmissible is how easily it spreads to someone else, and virulence is how much disease it causes, right? So far, there's no evidence that it's more virulent. The only evidence is suggesting that it may be more transmissible. And so, yes, you're right. If it's more transmissible, then one person who's infected should infect more other people. And we're waiting to see in the U.S. if that's happened. They suggested that's what's happening in the U.K. and in South Africa. But, as I said last time, it's an association, right? You have this new variant and you have an association of higher case numbers, but you really need to put the two together. And we have a perfect situation in the U.S. where the variant is now arrived, and we can see in the next couple of weeks, does it explode or is it meh? And we'll see.
Yeah. Can you, if you got COVID 3 months ago, can you get the new variant and get sick again?
I see no data suggesting that. Everything I've seen so far says that immunity to the original virus is going to protect you from the variant, and the vaccine immunity is also going to protect you from the variant. And that's good news, right? Because if that were the case, boy, that would be scary. But, increased transmission we can deal with. But if it escaped immunity, that would be a problem. And we have to keep our eyes on that for sure. We have to keep making sure that this variant can be blocked by antibodies from vaccination and by prior infection for sure.
Yeah. Because I have a couple of friends who have had COVID and they think they're immune, but now they're worried again that they may get it all sick over again a second time. You're saying right now that doesn't seem to be the case.
No,
okay. Wonderful. Microbe.tv, you heard the professor say TWIV. That's not a scientific term. That's This Week in Virology. Although the podcast is so popular, it may become an actual science term. Professor Vincent Racaniello, appreciate you as always, sir.
Thank you, sir. Have a good week.
You as well. Tell you every day, Professor Vincent Racaniello by our listeners is known as the professor. What does the professor say? What's the professor say? So always grateful to talk to him. Okay, we'll do it again tomorrow. We'll see what happens with articles of impeachment and all this other nonsense coming up. True story, Mike Slater. Spread the word.